The morning sun glinted off the sleek red Lamborghini as it tore down Ocean Avenue, the engine's roar turning heads along the palm-lined street. Behind the wheel, Vanessa Caldwell felt that familiar rush of power. The speedometer crept past 90 in a 45 zone, but she merely smiled, the wind whipping through her hair. Rules were for other people, ordinary people, not for her. At 32, Vanessa had never truly known what it meant to face consequences. Her life had been a carefully curated bubble of privilege, wrapped in the protective embrace of the Caldwell family fortune. Her father, Richard Caldwell, had built an empire of luxury high-rises and exclusive developments across 3 states. His name adorned buildings, charity galas, and most importantly, the checkbooks of nearly every important official in the city. "Miss, I need you to pull over," came a voice through a megaphone, cutting through the music blasting from her car's sound system. Vanessa glanced in her rearview mirror, noting the police cruiser with flashing lights. She rolled her eyes and reluctantly pulled to the curb, fishing in her glove compartment for the little leather folder that held her license and registration along with several $100 bills, her father's suggested traffic stop solution. She checked her reflection in the mirror, applied a fresh coat of lip gloss, and rolled down her window as the officer approached. "Do you know why I pulled you over today?" asked Officer Rodriguez, a young cop with serious eyes that didn't waver even as Vanessa flashed her practiced smile. "I'm guessing there's some misunderstanding," she said, handing over her license along with the leather folder that fell open to reveal the cash inside. "I'm sure we can clear this up quickly. My father is Richard Caldwell, you know, Caldwell Properties. Perhaps you've heard of him." But instead of the usual knowing nod, the officer's expression hardened. He picked up the license, deliberately ignoring the cash. "Ms. Caldwell, you were driving at twice the speed limit in a busy area. I also noticed there's alcohol on your breath. Have you been drinking this morning?" Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. "Just a mimosa with brunch. Look, there must be someone you can call. Chief Bennett and my father play golf every Sunday." Officer Rodriguez reached for his body camera, making sure it was recording. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle and perform a field sobriety test." "This is ridiculous," Vanessa snapped, her charm evaporating. "Do you have any idea who I am? One call from my father and you'll be directing traffic at school crossings for the rest of your career. Ma'am, please exit the vehicle." 20 minutes later, Vanessa sat in the back of the police cruiser, her designer sunglasses hiding eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen to her, ever. As Officer Rodriguez wrote up not just a speeding ticket, but also citations for reckless driving and driving under the influence, she fumbled with her phone, leaving her third angry voicemail for her father's assistant. "This is outrageous. Some rookie cop doesn't know how things work around here. Fix this immediately or heads will roll." But deep down, something felt different this time. Officer Rodriguez wasn't from around here. He hadn't grown up hearing the Caldwell name spoken in hushed, respectful tones. He didn't owe her father any favors. He was just doing his job, treating her like he would anyone else who endangered lives on his streets. As the officer placed the citations in her manicured hands, he looked her straight in the eye. "Court date is at the bottom. I strongly suggest you don't miss it." Vanessa crumpled the papers in her fist as soon as he turned away. This was nothing more than an inconvenience. By tomorrow, these citations would disappear like all the others. Her father would make a call, write a check, and the world would right itself again. That's how it had always worked. Little did she know, her ticket had already been entered into the system, a system that was about to introduce her to Judge Gloria Michaels, a woman who had built her reputation on the belief that justice should be truly blind, especially to the influence of wealth and power. Vanessa Caldwell's sense of being untouchable didn't start with her fancy car or her father's millions. It began much earlier, planted like a seed in the fertile soil of childhood privilege, then watered generously with years of special treatment. At Westlake Academy, where tuition cost more than most families earned in a year, 12-year-old Vanessa ruled the hallways. One cold winter day, she tripped a quiet new scholarship girl named Lally, sending her sprawling across the polished floor. Books scattered everywhere as other kids laughed. When Lily reported the bullying to her teacher, Mrs. Powell simply sighed. "Are you sure you didn't just slip?" Mrs. Powell asked, avoiding Lally's eyes. The Caldwell family just funded our new science wing. Maybe you're just having trouble fitting in. The message was clear. Some students were more valuable than others. By 16, Vanessa had learned that tears and tantrums could get her anything. When she failed her chemistry midterm after skipping class for a shopping trip, her father made a special visit to the headmaster. The next day, her F mysteriously transformed into a B+. Your father explained about your migraine problems, the chemistry teacher told her with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. We're making a special accommodation. Vanessa smirked. She didn't have migraines, but she did have a father who had donated the chemistry lab equipment. College was just more of the same. While other students pulled all-nighters at the library, Vanessa partied. When assignments came due, she paid smarter students to do the work. When professors questioned her absences, a sizable donation from Richard Caldwell to the university's endowment fund would follow. Suddenly, special exceptions would be made. We understand that some students have unique circumstances, the dean explained after Vanessa missed an entire semester of classes but somehow remained enrolled. The pattern continued into her 20s, hardening like cement around her worldview. At the grand opening of La Mar, the city's most exclusive restaurant, Vanessa arrived with a group of friends, loudly demanding the best table despite not having a reservation. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked tonight," the host explained politely. "We could accommodate you tomorrow evening." Vanessa's face darkened. "Do you know who my father is? He owns the building you're standing in." Within minutes, another party was discreetly moved, and Vanessa was seated at the best table in the house. Throughout dinner, she loudly criticized the service, sent back perfectly prepared dishes, and mocked the waiter's accent. When the bill came, she left no tip. "They should be grateful we even came here," she told her friends as they left. Behind her, the waiter who had served them with professionalism, despite her abuse, watched silently, supporting his family on those missing tips. By her 30s, Vanessa had a file folder of parking tickets she never paid. When stores closed, they stayed open for her. When lines formed, she skipped to the front. The world bent to her will, or rather, to her father's influence. Once, she knocked over an elderly woman while rushing through a department store. Instead of helping the woman up, Vanessa stepped around her. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, not breaking stride. Later that same day, when a security guard approached her about the incident, the store manager quickly intervened. "Ms. Caldwell is one of our VIP clients," the manager said, ushering the guard away. "There must be some misunderstanding." There was no misunderstanding. Just another day of Vanessa moving through the world as if it were created specifically for her, leaving a wake of hurt feelings, broken rules, and special accommodations. The morning of her DUI stop, Vanessa had called her father from the roadside, certain this problem would disappear like all the others. Richard Caldwell made his usual calls, but Officer Rodriguez had already filed his report, complete with body camera footage of Vanessa's behavior and the attempted bribe. For the first time, the machinery of privilege that had always protected Vanessa sputtered. A small, unfamiliar knot of worry formed in her stomach as her father's call went straight to the police chief's voicemail. "Don't worry about this ticket," Richard assured her later. "It'll go away like all the others." But somewhere in the courthouse, a file with Vanessa's name on it landed on Judge Gloria Michaels' desk, and Judge Michaels was already reading through it with narrowed eyes, seeing a pattern that had gone unchecked for far too long. The courthouse stood tall and gray against the bright blue sky, its stone steps worn by the footsteps of thousands who had come seeking justice or facing judgment. Vanessa Caldwell glanced at her diamond-studded watch and frowned. Her court appointment had been set for 9:00 a.m., but it was already 10:15. She hadn't bothered to hurry. Courts ran late anyway, and surely they would wait for her. She stepped out of her driver's luxury SUV, having been forced to hire a car service since her license was temporarily suspended. The driver opened her door, and she barely acknowledged him as she checked her reflection in her compact mirror, patting her perfectly styled hair. "Wait here," she told the driver. "This shouldn't take long. Just some paperwork to clear up this silly misunderstanding." The security guards at the courthouse entrance gave her a once-over as she approached, her 4-inch designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She dropped her designer purse on the conveyor belt with a dramatic sigh and stepped through the metal detector. "Arms out to the side, please," said the female security officer. Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Is this really necessary? I'm just here for a minor traffic thing." The security officer's expression didn't change. "Everyone goes through the same security, ma'am." Inside the courtroom, rows of wooden benches were already filled with people waiting for their cases to be called. The air smelled like furniture polish and nervous sweat. Vanessa wrinkled her nose as she looked for an empty seat, finally squeezing in beside an older man in a worn suit. She immediately pulled out her phone, ignoring the large sign at the front of the room that clearly stated NOCEL for ease. Her fingers flew across the screen as she texted her friends about this total waste of a morning and how she'd be out in time for lunch at the club. Up at the bench sat Judge Gloria Michaels, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose as she carefully reviewed each case. There was nothing flashy about her, just a quiet, watchful competence that commanded the room without raising her voice. Vanessa barely glanced at the judge, continuing to text while occasionally releasing loud, dramatic sighs. The bailiff, a tall man with a serious expression, looked in her direction several times, but she ignored him too. "Turn off your phone, please," whispered the man sitting next to her. "Mind your own business," Vanessa snapped, turning slightly away from him but continuing to text. Cases were called one by one. A young man with a speeding ticket. An older woman contesting a parking violation. A middle-aged man with a citation for an expired registration. Judge Michaels listened carefully to each person, asked relevant questions, and made her decisions without rushing. Vanessa checked her watch again. She'd already been waiting over an hour. This was ridiculous. Didn't they know she had important things to do? Vanessa Caldwell, the clerk finally called. "About time," she muttered, standing up and smoothing her expensive skirt. She strutted toward the front of the courtroom, as if walking a runway, phone still in hand. "Miss Caldwell," Judge Michaels said, looking up from her papers, "you're over an hour late for your scheduled appearance." Vanessa waved her hand dismissively. "Traffic was terrible. Anyway, I'm here now." The judge's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Please put your phone away while in my courtroom." "I'm just sending a quick text," Vanessa replied, not looking up from her screen. The courtroom fell silent. The bailiff stepped forward, but Judge Michaels held up a hand to stop him. "Ms. Caldwell," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. In this courtroom, my instructions are not suggestions. They are orders. Put your phone away immediately." Something in the judge's tone finally penetrated Vanessa's bubble. She looked up, meeting Judge Michaels' steady gaze, and for the first time felt a flicker of unease. Slowly, she lowered her phone and dropped it into her purse. Judge Michaels picked up a file, thicker than most of the others that had crossed her bench that morning. She opened it carefully and began to read. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Ms. Caldwell, you are here today on charges of speeding, reckless driving, and driving under the influence. How do you plead?" Vanessa flashed what she thought was her most charming smile. "Look, there's been a mix-up. My father usually handles these little problems. If you could just speak to him." "That wasn't one of the options, Ms. Caldwell," Judge Michaels interrupted, looking at her over her reading glasses. "The choices are guilty, not guilty, or no contest." For the first time in a very long time, Vanessa felt completely out of her depth. This wasn't going according to plan at all. Vanessa stood before Judge Michaels, the smile frozen on her face. The courtroom felt suddenly too warm, too quiet, too real. "You, not guilty, I guess," she finally said with a shrug. "That's what people said in movies, right?" Judge Michaels nodded slowly, then flipped through several pages in the file. Vanessa shifted her weight from one expensive heel to the other. What was taking so long? This should have been simple, a quick appearance, a small fine maybe, and then back to her normal life. "Ms. Caldwell," the judge said at last, looking up. "Before we proceed, I'd like to discuss something interesting I found while reviewing your case." Vanessa nodded impatiently. "Sure, whatever. Can we hurry this up? I have a lunch reservation at noon." A few people in the courtroom gasped quietly at her tone. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up, but Judge Michaels remained perfectly calm. "Your lunch plans are not my concern, Ms. Caldwell. My concern is this. She held up a document. This is a record of your driving history. According to this official report, you've received only 2 minor parking tickets in the past 10 years. Is that accurate? Vanessa relaxed a bit. Yes, that sounds right. That's strange, Judge Michaels continued, because when my clerk ran a more thorough search, we found something very different. She picked up another, much thicker file. We'd found 27 traffic violations over the past 5 years alone. Speeding, running red lights, illegal parking, even a hit and run involving a parked car last year. The color drained from Vanessa's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Judge Michaels said quietly. Every single one of these violations mysteriously disappeared from the system within days of being issued. But they left traces, Ms. Caldwell, digital fingerprints, and I've spent the past week following those fingerprints. Vanessa's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I've also been speaking with several police officers, the judge continued, who suddenly remembered incidents involving you once they were assured they could speak freely without fear of losing their jobs. This is ridiculous, Vanessa snapped, her voice rising. My father. Yes, let's talk about your father, Judge Michaels interrupted. Richard Caldwell has made 17 calls to various officials regarding this current case. Did you know that? Vanessa swallowed hard. The courtroom had become so silent she could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Using influence to interfere with the justice system is not just unethical, Ms. Caldwell. In some cases, it's illegal. You can't talk to me like this, Vanessa said, her voice shaking now, not with fear, but with anger. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my family is? My father built half this city. Judge Michaels removed her reading glasses and looked directly at Vanessa. In this courtroom, Ms. Caldwell, you are exactly what everyone else is, a citizen subject to the same laws as everyone else. No more, no less. This is a joke, Vanessa said with a harsh laugh. Call my father. He'll clear this whole thing up. The judge's expression hardened slightly. Mr. Caldwell is welcome to observe these proceedings as a member of the public, but he has no authority in my courtroom. Something in the judge's calm certainty finally broke through Vanessa's armor of entitlement. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she felt genuinely afraid. This woman wasn't impressed by her name or her wealth. She wasn't going to back down. Your Honor, Vanessa began, her voice softer now, trying a different approach. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm willing to pay whatever fine. Oh, we're well beyond fines at this point, Ms. Caldwell, Judge Michaels said, closing the file. What I'm seeing here is a pattern of dangerous behavior enabled by corruption and influence, and it stops today. Vanessa's legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the table in front of her. But first, the judge continued, I'd like to address your comment about who you are. In my 30 years on the bench, I've learned that character isn't revealed by who a person is when things are going their way. It's revealed by how they act when they don't get what they want. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. And right now, Ms. Caldwell, you're showing this court exactly who you are. I want a lawyer, Vanessa finally managed to say. Judge Michaels nodded. A wise decision. Perhaps the first one you've made today. She turned to the bailiff. We'll take a 30-minute recess to allow Ms. Caldwell to contact legal counsel. As the gavel came down, Vanessa stood frozen in place. The familiar world where her last name opened every door had suddenly vanished. In its place was this new reality, one where actions had consequences, even for a Caldwell. And she had no idea how to navigate it. The courtroom fell silent as Vanessa returned with her hastily hired lawyer, a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit who kept checking his watch. She had called the family attorney during the recess, but he was out of the country. This man, a junior partner at a prestigious firm, was the best she could find on short notice. He whispered something in her ear, and she nodded stiffly, her usual confidence noticeably dimmed. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with calls from her father, but courthouse rules prevented her from answering. For once in her life, Daddy couldn't fix things with a phone call. Court is now back in session, announced the bailiff as Judge Michaels returned to the bench. Ms. Caldwell, I see you've obtained counsel, the judge noted, nodding toward the lawyer. "Have you had sufficient time to discuss your situation?" The lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, I've just been brought onto this case and would request a continuance to properly review the charges against my client." Judge Michaels considered this for a moment. "Under normal circumstances, I would grant such a request. However, given the pattern of interference we've already seen in this case, I'm concerned about the administration of justice." She paused. "I'll allow you 15 minutes to confer with your client in the side chamber, after which we will proceed." The lawyer looked stunned. "But, Your Honor." "15 minutes, counselor. The bailiff will show you where you can speak privately." Vanessa and her lawyer disappeared into a small room off the main courtroom. Through the window in the door, onlookers could see her gesturing angrily while he attempted to calm her down. When they returned, her face was flushed and his tie was slightly askew. "Are you ready to proceed?" Judge Michaels asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice resigned. "After reviewing the situation, my client wishes to change her plea to guilty on all charges." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Michaels nodded. "Very well, we'll now move to sentencing." Vanessa's lawyer stepped forward. "If I may, Your Honor, Ms. Caldwell is a first-time offender with no prior convictions. We would ask the court for leniency, perhaps community service, and a fine would be appropriate." Judge Michaels looked down at her file again. "Mr. Phillips, while it's true that Ms. Caldwell has no prior convictions, that's only because they've been systematically erased. This is not, in fact, a first offense. It is merely the first time she's been held accountable." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Even so, Your Honor." "Let me be clear," Judge Michaels interrupted. "What we have here is not just a case of driving under the influence. We have a pattern of reckless behavior that has endangered public safety repeatedly, combined with consistent obstruction of justice." She looked directly at Vanessa. "Ms. Caldwell, do you understand that your actions could have killed someone?" Vanessa stared at the floor. "Yes," she whispered. "I can't hear you," the judge said. "Yes," Vanessa repeated, louder this time, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Judge Michaels nodded. "Having considered all factors in this case, I hereby sentence you to the following: 200 hours of community service at the downtown homeless shelter, a fine of $25,000 to be paid personally by you, not by your family, a 1-year suspension of your driver's license, mandatory attendance at alcohol education classes, and 3 months of weekend jail time to be served from Friday evening to Sunday evening for the next 12 weekends." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Vanessa swayed on her feet. "Weekend jail?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Ms. Caldwell. You will report to the County Detention Center at 6 p.m. each Friday and be released at 6 p.m. each Sunday. This will allow you to maintain employment during the week while experiencing the consequences of your actions." "But I don't have a job," Vanessa stammered. "Then perhaps it's time you found one," Judge Michaels replied. "The shelter where you'll be performing your community service is often hiring. They pay minimum wage." Vanessa's lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but she wasn't listening. The world was spinning around her. Jail? A job? Minimum wage? This couldn't be happening. "Your Honor," a deep voice called from the back of the courtroom. Richard Caldwell strode down the center aisle, his expensive suit and commanding presence drawing all eyes. "I must object to this excessive sentence. My daughter has made a mistake, Platt." "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Michaels cut him off. "Unless you are a licensed attorney representing your daughter, you have no standing to address this court." "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, his face reddening. "I do," the judge replied calmly. "And I know exactly what you've done to interfere with the legal system over the years. In fact, I've referred those matters to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. If you continue to disrupt these proceedings, you'll be held in contempt." For perhaps the first time in his life, Richard Caldwell was speechless. He looked from the judge to his daughter, then back again. "This sentence begins immediately," Judge Michaels continued, ignoring him. "Ms. Caldwell, you will report to the detention center this Friday at 6 p.m. The bailiff will provide you with all necessary paperwork." She brought down her gavel with a sharp crack. "Court is adjourned." As the courtroom began to empty, Vanessa stood frozen in place, the reality of her situation finally, truly sinking in. No one was coming to save her this time. The county detention center smelled like bleach and bad decisions. Vanessa sat on the thin mattress of her weekend cell, still wearing the orange jumpsuit they'd given her after taking away her designer clothes. Her perfectly manicured nails looked ridiculous against the rough fabric. She hadn't slept all night. The sounds of the other women in nearby cells, the harsh lights that never fully turned off, and the rock-hard pillow made rest impossible. "First weekend's the hardest," said her cellmate, an older woman named Betty who was serving time for shoplifting. "By the third or fourth, you get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it," Vanessa snapped, then immediately regretted her tone. Betty had been kind to her, showing her the unwritten rules of Jeddah life, which guards were fair, which shower to use, how to eat quickly before someone took your food. Betty just shrugged. "Want to get used to it or not, you're here now." Those words echoed in Vanessa's head as she was released that Sunday evening, her father waiting in his black luxury car outside the detention center gates. The ride home was silent. When they arrived at her penthouse apartment, he finally spoke. "I've left a credit card on your kitchen counter. Use it to pay your fine." Vanessa nodded, expecting him to follow her inside as he usually did, ready to fix whatever problem she was facing. Instead, he looked straight ahead through the windshield. "Dad," she said, confused. "I've spent 30 years protecting you from consequences, Vanessa, and look where it's gotten you." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Judge Michaels was right about one thing, if being part of the problem. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're on your own for this one. The credit card is for the fine only. Your allowance is cut off until you complete your sentence." "But I have a reputation to protect, and right now you're damaging it. Fix this mess you've created. Show me you can actually take responsibility for once in your life." The next morning, Vanessa arrived at the downtown homeless shelter for her first day of community service. Her hands shook as she pressed the buzzer. She'd never been to this part of town before. The streets were dirty, the buildings run down. She felt completely out of place in her casual designer outfit, the cheapest thing she owned, but still worth more than what most people here would earn in months. A tired-looking woman opened the door. "You must be Vanessa." "I'm Diane, the volunteer coordinator. We've been expecting you." The inside of the shelter was clean but worn. The paint was peeling in places, and the furniture looked like it had been donated decades ago. Diane led her to a back room filled with industrial-sized washing machines and mountains of sheets and towels. "You'll start in a laundry room," Diane explained, handing her a pair of rubber gloves. "All these need to be washed, dried, and folded before lunch." Vanessa stared at the piles. "But there are hundreds." "Better get started then," Diane said, turning to leave. "Bathroom's down the hall if you need it. Break room has a coffee machine, but you need to bring your own coffee." Left alone with the mountain of laundry, Vanessa felt tears welling in her eyes. She had never done laundry in her life. She sent everything out to be cleaned. She didn't even know how to turn on the machines. After 10 minutes of frustrated button pushing, she heard someone enter the room behind her. "Need some help?" a woman's voice asked. Vanessa turned to see a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair. She wore a clean but faded sweater and jeans. I don't know how to work these," Vanessa admitted, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. The woman nodded without judgment. "I'm Maria. I stay here sometimes when my sister's place gets too crowded." She stepped forward and showed Vanessa how to load the machine, how much detergent to use, which settings to choose. "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly when the first load was rumbling away. Maria studied her face. "Court-ordered service?" Vanessa nodded, expecting disgust or mockery. "Well," Maria said simply, "we all make mistakes. The question is what we learn from them." She picked up a basket of dirty towels. "I'll help you get started, but then I've got a job interview at noon." "You're looking for work?" Vanessa asked, surprised that this woman who was obviously homeless would be helping her instead of the other way around. Maria smiled slightly. "I was a financial analyst for 20 years before the economy crashed, and I lost everything. Life can change quickly, you know. One day you're on top of the world, the next." She gestured around the laundry room. "But I'm working my way back." For the first time in her life, Vanessa felt genuinely humbled. She had judged this woman instantly based on her circumstances, just as she had judged everyone else she'd ever met. Yet Maria had more dignity in her worn shoes than Vanessa had in her entire wardrobe of designer clothes. "I'd like to hear about that," Vanessa said softly. "About your work, I mean, if you want to tell me." And as they folded endless sheets together, Maria began to share her story. 6 months had passed since Vanessa's sentencing. The courthouse looked exactly the same as she climbed the steps, but she was almost unrecognizable. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect manicure. Today, she wore simple dark pants and a plain blouse she'd bought from a department store. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She was due for her follow-up hearing with Judge Michaels, a standard check-in to review her progress. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed through security, not from anger this time, but from nervousness. She cared about the outcome in a way she never would have imagined 6 months ago. "You've got this," said Maria, who had come along for moral support. The two had formed an unlikely friendship during Vanessa's community service hours. Maria had found a job at a small accounting firm and had recently moved into her own apartment, a tiny studio, but her own space nonetheless. She'd helped Vanessa navigate a world where money and connections couldn't solve everything. The courtroom was less crowded today. Vanessa took a seat in the front row and waited quietly, a far cry from her impatient texting during her first appearance. When her name was called, she approached the bench with steady steps. "Ms. Caldwell," Judge Michaels said, looking up from her papers. The judge looked exactly as Vanessa remembered, stern but fair, her silver straight hair pulled back neatly. "It's been 6 months since your sentencing. Let's review your progress." Vanessa stood straight, hands clasped in front of her. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge consulted a file. "I see you've completed your community service hours at the downtown homeless shelter. In fact, according to this report, you've put in nearly 300 hours, well beyond the required 200. "Yes, Your Honor." "And you've paid your fine in full, attended all required alcohol education classes, and served your weekend jail time without incident." "That's correct, Your Honor." Judge Michaels peered at Vanessa over her reading glasses. "The director of the shelter has written you quite a recommendation. She says you've started a program helping residents rebuild their credit scores and find employment. Can you tell me about that?" Vanessa took a deep breath. "After I met some of the residents, I realized many of them were there because of bad luck, not bad choices. Some had lost jobs, others had medical bills they couldn't pay. I noticed that many had skills but couldn't find work because of poor credit or gaps in employment." She continued, gaining confidence as she spoke. "I used what I know, my business connections and my understanding of how financial systems work, to help them. We created a workshop that teaches basic financial literacy, helps people understand their credit reports, and connects them with employers willing to give them a chance." Judge Michaels nodded. "And I understand you're now employed there part-time?" "Yes, Your Honor, 3 days a week." "The pay isn't much, but—" Vanessa paused, a small smile crossing her face. "It turns out helping others feels better than anything I've ever bought." For the first time, Judge Michaels smiled too, just slightly. "Ms. Caldwell, when you first appeared in my courtroom, you were a person who believed rules didn't apply to you. What would you say to that person now, if you could speak to her?" Vanessa thought for a moment. I'd tell her that she was missing out on real life. That all her privilege was actually a prison keeping her from connecting with people. That she had so much to learn from those she looked down on. She glanced back at Maria in the gallery. "And I'd thank you, Your Honor, for being the one person who finally said no to me." The courtroom was silent. Even the clerk had stopped shuffling papers. "Well," Judge Michaels said finally, "it appears the sentence has achieved its intended purpose. Your probation period is complete, Ms. Caldwell. You're free to move forward with your life." "Thank you, Your Honor," Vanessa said, feeling tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. The judge gathered her papers. "Sometimes people need to lose their artificial advantages to discover their real strengths. You seem to have found yours." 1 year later, Vanessa stood at the podium in a community center conference room, addressing a group of 20 formerly homeless individuals who were graduating from her expanded financial literacy program. The room was simple but bright, decorated with handmade congratulations signs. "When I started this journey, I was forced to be here," she told them honestly. "But each of you chose to be here. You chose to believe in yourselves when the world had given you every reason not to. That makes you stronger than I ever was." From the back of the room, she spotted a familiar figure slipping in quietly, Judge Michaels, who had come to witness the graduation without fanfare. Their eyes met briefly, and the judge gave her a small nod of approval. After the ceremony, a local reporter approached Vanessa. "Your program has helped over 100 people transition from homelessness to employment this year. What inspired you to start it?" Vanessa smiled, thinking of how to answer. "Let's just say I learned that no one is above the law, but everyone deserves a second chance, including me." As she walked home that evening to her modest apartment, Vanessa realized she didn't miss her old life of luxury and privilege. She had found something better: purpose, connection, and the quiet pride that comes from earning respect rather than demanding it. The path hadn't been easy, but as Maria often said, the most worthwhile journeys rarely are.